Welcome to LG Ministry. We are glad you have chosen to watch our program today. My name is Cougan and I am the minister at the Lone Grove Church of Christ. Our program is overseen by the elders at our congregation. Our hope and desire is that you will open up your Bible and that you'll study along with us. I hope you'll find this series of lessons I'm preaching on the life of Christ helpful. I will do my best to present the life of Christ in a chronological order to the best of my ability. This will be a long series because there's a lot of great lessons to be learned from our master teacher, Jesus. I hope you allow these lessons to increase your knowledge about Jesus and what he taught, and that you will be challenged to grow from them. Let's get to our lesson. In this lesson on the life of Christ, we are leaving Luke's account that we looked at in our last lesson, and we're going to look at John chapter 11. So let's begin. John 11, verse number 1. Now a certain man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. It was that Mary who anointed the Lord with fragrant oil and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. This chapter records one of the greatest miracles Jesus ever did, or at least in my mind, which is the seventh miracle of Jesus in John's account. It all begins with Lazarus being sick. Lazarus and Mary were common names, but John gives us some details so that we can know which Lazarus and Mary he was talking about. There are two places called Bethany. One was located less than 2 miles east of Jerusalem on the southeast slope of the Mount of Olives, which is where Mary, Martha, and Lazarus lived. John 11, verse number 18. The other Bethany, which Jesus was at, was on the east side of the Jordan River where John the Baptist had been baptizing. John 1, verse 28, and chapters 10 and verse number 40. Verse 2 teaches that this Lazarus was the brother of the Mary who anointed Jesus with fragrant oil and wiped his feet with her hair. John 11, verse 3. Therefore the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, behold, him whom you love is sick. When Jesus heard that, he said, This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Since Lazarus was sick, his concerned sisters sent word to Jesus about him. They did not make any demands, but they wanted Jesus to know that his good friend was sick. Most likely, when this messenger heard Jesus say that this sickness was not unto death, but for the glory of God, he probably took these words back to Mary and Martha. Jesus already knew that Lazarus was going to die from his sickness, but he also knew that he was going to raise him from the dead, which would be done to glorify God and to prove once again that Jesus is the Son of God. John 11, verse number 5. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. Jesus did not just love the family of Lazarus as a whole. He loved each member of the family. Every Christian today is loved by Jesus. Even though Jesus loved Lazarus and knew he was going to die, he stayed behind 2 more days. Now some might view this delay as unloving since he could have healed his friend, but he always put the Father's will first. It is possible that his human side may have wanted to go and heal Lazarus. And as far as that goes, he could have healed him from where he was because he had done that before, such as in Luke 7, verses 1 through 10. But Jesus was willing to uphold the will of the Father, no matter how difficult it might be for him. John 11, verse number 7. Then after this, he said to the disciples, Let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, lately the Jews sought to stone you. Are you going there again? From the disciples' point of view, this did not make much sense to them because they had no idea why Jesus would want to go to Judea again where the Jews wanted to stone him. They did not know that Jesus wanted to visit Lazarus because he only said that he wanted to go to Judea without specifying Bethany. John 11, verse number 9. Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. But if one walks in the night, he stumbles, because the light is not in him." Jesus was saying the same thing that he had been saying before. It was not time for him to die, and he must continue to do the works of the Father that he sent him to do. John 9 and verse number 4. In this illustration, Jesus alludes to the 12-hour Jewish day from sunrise to sunset when the work was to be done because they could see. In a similar way, Jesus is saying that his day is not over and that he is not walking in the dark because his mission is from the Father, and it's clear. His enemies are not going to be able to change that, and they certainly aren't going to be able to kill him before his time. John 11, verse number 11. These things he said, and after that he said to them, "Our friend Lazarus sleeps, but I go that I may wake him up." Then his disciples said, "Lord, if he sleeps, he will get well." However, Jesus spoke of his death, but they thought that he was speaking about taking rest and sleep. Then Jesus said to them plainly, "Lazarus is dead." Again, his disciples would have been confused because they thought he was talking about Lazarus being asleep and not dead. It wouldn't make any sense for Jesus to risk his life just to go wake up Lazarus from a common sleep. Then Jesus tells them plainly that Lazarus is dead. There are many times in the scriptures that death is called sleep, such as in Daniel 12, verse number 2, Matthew 27, verses 52, Acts 7, verse number 60, and 1 Thessalonians 4 and verse 13. Being asleep is a comforting way to describe death because sleep is temporary. Burton Kaufman describes it this way: of all that Jesus ever said of death, this is the most encouraging. Number one, sleep is a temporary thing, and so by this our Lord revealed that death too is not permanent. Number two, sleep refreshes and rejuvenates. Thus, in the resurrection, this mortal shall put on immortality, and this corruptible shall put on incorruption. Number three, from sleep men awaken, and the promise is secure in the Master's words that all that are in the tombs shall come forth. John 5, verse 29. Number 4, sleep is a time of rest, and the dead also shall rest from their labors. Revelation 14, verse number 13. The respect of the human race for this word of Jesus Christ is revealed in the fact of their inscribing these words, asleep in Jesus, upon millions of tombs in all ages since then. When Jesus talked about Lazarus being asleep, he was not teaching the doctrine of the Jehovah's Witnesses who teach that a person is so sleeping when he dies. When the scriptures talk about someone being asleep, they're talking about the body and not the soul. It is the body that returns back to the earth, and the spirit returns to God. Daniel 12, verse 2, and Ecclesiastes 12, and verse number 7. This can be seen in the story of the rich man and Lazarus, Luke 16, verses 19 through 31. Also, we can see that the wicked are said to be under punishment prior to the judgment day, which means their souls are alive and well. 2 Peter 2, verse number 9. There are many other passages that teach that our souls do not remain in the body after death and that we are conscious after death, such as in Luke 23, verse 43, 2 Corinthians 5 and verse number 8, Philippians 1, verses 21 through 23, Revelation 6, verses 9 through 11, chapter 7, verses 15 through 17, and chapters 20 and verse number 4. So Jesus was going to wake up Lazarus from the dead. John 11, verse 15. And I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, that you may believe. Nevertheless, let us go to him. Then Thomas, who is called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. Jesus was glad his disciples would be able to see him raise Lazarus from the dead, because it would bring their faith to a higher level. If Jesus had been there and had healed Lazarus from being sick, it would have been more of what he had already done before in the past. But to raise a man from being dead for 4 days would prove beyond doubt that Jesus was the Son of God. Thomas took the lead and suggested that all of them go with Jesus to go die with him. Obviously, Thomas was ready to die with Jesus, and he thought if they went back to Judea, Jesus would be put to death. John 11, verse 17. So when Jesus came, he found that he had already been in the tomb 4 days. Lazarus had been dead for 4 days, and his body would have started to decompose. One possible reason Jesus waited that long before raising Lazarus from the dead was because of what the rabbis believed at that time. Hendrickson wrote, "According to rabbinical tradition, the soul of a deceased person hovers around the body for 3 days in hope of a reunion, but takes its final departure when it notices that the body has entered a state of decomposition." If Jesus had raised Lazarus from the dead on day 1, or 2, or 3, these Jews could have said, well, it was just a coincidence, and that they would say that his soul had just decided to go back into his body. However, they could not make such a claim on the 4th day, and that is the reason this miracle would send a strong message to the opposing Jews that Jesus is the Son of God. Whether this was the reason or not, bringing back a man who had been dead for 4 days would be an undeniable miracle. John 11, verse number 18. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had joined the women around Martha and Mary to comfort them concerning their brother. Verse 18 tells us which Bethany this was. Since it was close to Jerusalem, many Jews were able to come and comfort Martha and Mary, which suggests that their family was well respected by the Jews. Many of these Jews would be some of the same ones who wanted Jesus dead. In regards to the tradition of their mourning, notice the following. The rules laid down by rabbis required 7 days public and 30 days private mourning for distinguished or important personages. John 11, verse number 20. Then Martha, as soon as she heard that Jesus was coming, went and met him, but Mary was sitting in the house. Then Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. Martha is known for being industrious. When she heard that Jesus was coming, she left the house and found him. She probably did this to meet him in private to avoid a conflict between Jesus and these Jews. We can see her great faith in Jesus' ability to heal because she believed that he could have healed her brother if he had been there before he died. Now, verse 22 hints at the idea that Martha believed that Jesus could even do something about her brother now because she believed that God would give Jesus anything that he asked for. However, she could just be stating her confidence in Jesus' ability to accomplish what he wants through the Father. John 11, verse 23. Jesus said to her, Your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. When Jesus said that Lazarus would rise again, Martha thought that he was referring to the general resurrection on the last day, which all Jews believed in except for the Sadducees. She did not know that Jesus was saying that he was going to be risen from the dead that day. John 11, verse number 25. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. This is the 5th I am statement in John. And these words should bring comfort to all Christians because Jesus is the resurrection and the life. And those who believe in him and keep his word will never die. John 8, verse 51. This does not mean that we will not physically die because all of us will unless the Lord comes back before we die. When we do die, it is not the end of life. Instead, it is the beginning of our eternal lives as we wait in paradise for the general resurrection on the last day when we will be giving new incorruptible bodies according to 1 Corinthians 15 verse 42 and Philippians 3 and verse 21. And we will spend our eternity in heaven. When Martha made this great confession, she was not saying that she just now believed in Jesus, but that she had believed in Jesus. Several Bible versions show this by translating the verse in this way. I have believed that you are the Christ. Now let's look at John 11 verse 28. And when she had said these things, she went her way and secretly called Mary her sister, saying, The teacher has come and is calling for you. As soon as she heard that, she arose quickly and came to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the town, but was in the place where Martha met him. Then the Jews who were with her in the house and comforting her, when they saw that Mary rose up quickly and went out, followed her, saying, "She is going to the tomb to weep there." Jesus wanted to speak to Mary, so he had Martha go get her. She told her sister in secret that Jesus wanted to talk to her, so she quickly gets up and goes to him. We're not told specifically why this was done in secret or why Jesus did not go into the house, but I believe he was avoiding the conflict that his presence would have caused with these Jews. Now the Jews were mourning with Mary, and they assumed that she was running to the tomb to weep there, which was a common practice back then. John 11, verse 32. Then when Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she fell down at his feet, saying to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Therefore, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her weeping, he groaned in the spirit and was troubled. And he said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him." And some of them said, "Could not this man who opened the eyes of the blind also have kept this man from dying?" When Mary saw Jesus, she fell down at his feet and said the same thing that her sister did. Maybe both of them talked to each other about how their brother would have still been alive if Jesus had been there. Mary's words and actions show her faith in Jesus' ability to heal as well. But unlike her sister, she did not hint at anything being done for her brother now. The Jews had followed Mary, and they were all mourning together. When they mourned back then, it was not a silent mourning because they would wail loudly. And sometimes families would even hire professional mourners to help them mourn. As Jesus observed their mourning, he groaned in his spirit. The word groan can mean to be moved with anger, and some suggest that Jesus was angry at death. However, this word can also mean to feel strongly about something, to be deeply moved. Jesus had compassion for their sorrow. Their suffering moved him and caused him to be troubled in his own spirit. Jesus wanted to know where Lazarus' tomb was, and they were ready to show him. John records that Jesus wept. Jesus was moved to tears by their mourning, even though he knew he was about to raise Lazarus from the dead. This shows that Jesus does not like to see us hurting, and when we do, he hurts right along with us. We are instructed to have the same compassion for one another in 1 Corinthians 12 and verse 26. Some of the Jews believed Jesus wept because of his love for Lazarus, and some of them were chiding him for not being there to keep Lazarus from dying. When they made the statement about Jesus opening the eyes of the blind, they were referring to the miracle where Jesus made the blind man see in John chapter 9. The Jews did their best to deny this miracle, but this shows that it had made an impact on them. John 11, verse 38. Then Jesus, again groaning in himself, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of him who is dead, said to him, "Lord, by this time there is a stench, for he has been dead 4 days." Some believe that Jesus was groaning in himself partially due to what these Jews had said, but we do not know for sure. Jesus arrives at the tomb. It was common for the Jews to bury their dead in caves, and they would seal the opening of the cave with a stone to keep animals away from the body. Jesus instructs them to remove the stone. If Jesus wanted to, he could have miraculously just moved the stone by himself. But Jesus did not use his miracles to do what people could do for themselves. Martha was still unaware what Jesus was going to do, and she did not see the point in removing the stone because she knew that he'd been dead for 4 days. If they removed the stone, the stench would have been overwhelming. I have read that a dead body starts to stink within 24 hours, and by 3 days the smell is very strong because the body begins to decompose. Without going into further details, we can understand that Lazarus' body would have smelled bad, and no one could deny that he was dead. John 11, verse number 40. Jesus said to her, "Did I not say to you that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God?" Then they took away the stone from the place where the dead man was lying. And Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. And I know that you always hear me. But because of the people who are standing by, I said this, that they may believe that you sent me. Jesus reminded Martha of their earlier conversation when he told her that he is the resurrection and the life. The stone was removed, and Jesus prayed out loud to the Father for the benefit of those standing there. He wanted them to understand that the Father always listens to his prayers, and he wanted them to believe that the Father sent him into the world. He would prove this by raising Lazarus from the dead. This also teaches us that when we become Christians and we direct our prayers to the Father, he is always listening to us as well. John 11, verse 43. Now when he had said these things, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And he who had died came out bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was wrapped with a cloth. And Jesus said to him, Loose him and let him go. Jesus said with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And he did. This resurrection was a precursor to the final resurrection in which we will come forth from our graves at the voice of Jesus, John 5, verses 28 through 29. However, at the final resurrection, our resurrection will be like Jesus' resurrection in that he was raised through his grave clothes and out of his grave. Lazarus would have been buried in traditional way with linen wrapped all around his body from his neck down to his toes, and his face would have been covered with a face cloth. He would have been anointed with spices and oils just like Jesus was at his burial in John 19 and verse number 40. Even though Lazarus' hands and feet were bound with these grave clothes, he managed to work his way out of the tomb, which would not have been an easy task. Once he appeared, Jesus told them to unwrap him from his grave clothes. John 11, verse 45. Then many of the Jews who had come to Mary and had seen the things Jesus did believed in him. But some of them went away to the Pharisees and told them the things Jesus did. This was a miracle that no one could explain away. Not only had Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead after 4 days, he would have to completely restore his body back to the way it was. Otherwise, Lazarus would have looked like a zombie straight out of a horror movie. After seeing this with their own eyes, it would be hard for any of them to deny that Jesus is the Son of God. Many of the Jews believed in Jesus because of this miracle. However, some of them went and told the Pharisees what Jesus had done. Some have suggested that these Jews went to the Pharisees out of sincerity to tell them that Jesus was the Son of God. Others believe that these Jews believed that a miracle was done, but they did not believe that Jesus was the Son of God. So they went and they told the Pharisees what Jesus was doing now. Both of these are possible, but the last one is the most plausible to me. John 11, verse 47. Then the chief priest and the Pharisees gathered a council and said, What shall we do? For this man works many signs. If we let him alone like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and nation. The Sadducees and Pharisees gathered together to discuss this situation. They did not know what they were going to do about Jesus since he worked many signs. Notice, they did not deny that Jesus worked miracles, yet they were unwilling to believe in him. They knew if Jesus kept working miracles like this, that everyone would believe in him. They feared that this would cause a great rebellion and cause the Romans to come in and to destroy all the freedoms and power that they currently had. John 11, verse 49. And one of them, Caiaphas, being high priest that year, said to them, You know nothing at all, nor do you consider that it is expedient for us that one man should die for the people, and not that the whole nation should perish. Now this he did not say on his own authority, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation, and not for that nation only, but also that he would gather together in one the children of God who were scattered abroad. Caiaphas was the high priest at this time, and he was the head of the Sanhedrin council. What he said was not by his own authority because it came from God. He was prophesying about how Jesus would die for the nation. John elaborates on this and teaches that Jesus was not just dying for the nation of Israel, but for every nation. The gathering together of the children of God is referring to all those who would become Christians under the new covenant, who belong to the one church. Ephesians 4, verse number 4. Now let's look at John 11, verse 53. Then from that day on they plotted to put him to death. Therefore Jesus no longer walked openly among the Jews, but went from there into the country near the wilderness to a city called Ephraim, and there remained with his disciples. The Sanhedrin Council wanted Jesus dead, and that would be their main objective from that point forward. Since it was not time for Jesus' death, he and his disciples went to Ephraim, which was about 12 miles north of Jerusalem. He would not go back to Jerusalem until about 6 days before the Passover. John does not record what Jesus did during this time, but Kaufman suggests the following things occurred. He started the last journey to Jerusalem via Samaria and Galilee, healing 10 lepers en route, Luke 17, verses 11 through 37. He gave 2 parables on prayers, those of the pleading widow and the Pharisee and the publican, Luke 18, verses 1 through 14. He gave his teaching on divorce, Mark 10, verses 1 through 12, Matthew 19, 1 through 12. He received little children, Mark 10, verses 13 through 16, and so on. He spoke with the rich young ruler and gave the parable of the laborers in the vineyard, Mark 10, verses 17 through 31, and the parallel accounts. He gave the third prophecy of his death and resurrection, rebuked the ambition of Zebedee's sons, Mark 10, verses 32 through 45. He healed Bartimaeus and a companion at Jericho, Mark 10, verses 46 through 52, and parallel accounts. He visited Zacchaeus, gave the parable of the pounds, and went on up to Jerusalem, Luke 19. Now let's look at John 11, 55. And the Passover of the Jews was near, and many went from the country up to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves. Then they sought Jesus and spoke among themselves as they stood in the temple. What do you think? That he will not come to the feast? Now both the chief priests and the Pharisees had given a command that if anyone knew where he was, he should report it, that they might seize him. All Jewish males were required to attend the Passover, and many had arrived early so they could make themselves ceremonially clean. Many of them were talking and wondering if Jesus would show up for the feast. Earlier, the Sanhedrin Council had secretly sought to kill Jesus, but now they have made it known publicly that they want to seize Jesus. While this would have seemed like another Passover to most, it would be Jesus' last Passover. This brings us to the end of our lesson, and I hope you have found it helpful. Next time, we'll pick back up where we left off in Luke chapter 17. I hope you found today's lesson helpful. No matter what lesson I preach, I want you to test what I say or any person says about God's Word by comparing what is being said to what the Scriptures actually say. Don't ever be lazy in this area, because it's too important to simply trust in what man is saying, because we are all human and we're capable of being wrong. One thing we know for sure is that God's Word will not lead us astray. So always trust in it. As Psalm 146:3 says, "Do not put your trust in princes, nor in a son of man, in whom there is no help." Psalm 18, verse 30, "As for God, his way is perfect. The word of the Lord is proven. He is a shield to all who trust in him." I will always do my best to preach the truth, but I hope if you catch me teaching error that you will contact me so that we can discuss the matter. If you would like to learn more about LG Ministry and the congregation I preach at, feel free to visit our website at lgchurchofchrist.com.